This morning's Dharma talk title is something I've talked about before and actually would come under a lot of different headings. But I'm calling it backfilling again. Backfilling again. So you have to see the backfilling before the again doesn't keep happening. So this could mean for you, or possibly, that you might have to bring your awareness towards whatever is moving. And if you think that this six sense fields, including the mind, are separate from each other, it's a misunderstanding. I'm not even saying that they're connected particularly, but they're not separate. Backfilling, a simple way of putting it, is whatever's arising, whatever's going away, whatever's hanging around, those three, we don't like it. We want something else. So we might even backfill. It's kind of an active form of ignorance, like chattering to ourselves about it. Trungpa Rinpoche called it subconscious gossip. And he hadn't even studied psychology, at least Western. So if you see this happening, if you see that something happens and you notice there's an automatic kind of response coming from somewhere, well, that's good. That shouldn't be happening. Well, I don't know what the hell they were thinking. Those kind of auto response characteristics that come up in language where it's just waiting in the wings for it to be called on stage, or so you can say some kind of automatic response, rather than actually looking at it. If something shows up, to use the 5 dharmas of the Lankavatara Sutta, something appears, we name it, and we make up stuff about it, or we think about it, and then the other 2 we can talk about later, which are Buddha knowledge and suchness. But those first 2 are very important. Something shows up, and we name it immediately. It's not even we name it, it's like it comes up with a name. We don't notice the subtle differentiation between what is appearing and naming. This is the difference between intellect and awareness. You can't separate them because they're not separate. You can't they're not 2 different things. They're the same thing acting in the service of different situations. Awareness has no boss. But the ego mind may think it does. So if you've noticed this in your practice, sitting facing the wall, are you all right? Mm-hmm. So you're sitting facing the wall, whatever's coming up, you may go this way or that way, you may pick and choose, you may shove something away. So it's always about awareness. It's not about correcting yourself. It's difficult to understand, especially the way some teachers are teachings, some ways that the teaching is understood. It's just a misunderstanding, a pretty big one, that you have to control this situation. This is what controlling does to any situation. No more, what? Shall I use the fancy Western word? Progress? We have some progress in this tradition, but it's not exactly getting better. It's not exactly not getting worse. It's not exactly anything. So it seems necessary to do it with the awareness and the way in which you can do that. If you're already a meditator, if you're spending a lot of time on the cushion, training your mind to what? See. In other words, training your mind to give everything your attention, and whatever you're giving your attention to receive it. It could be a side ache. It could be the neighbors yelling next door. It could be your family yelling in the kitchen. So a way that you could do that would be to feel or see or understand or give your attention to the texture of that feeling, which probably will feel pretty crummy. It could be coming out of your own mind. It could be coming out of the environment. Give your attention to that, and then rather than go into some kind of backfilling, some kind of analysis that the ego, self-centered mind feels like you're getting somewhere. At least it's some way to occupy your time. You can kind of, sometimes it's called worry. Sometimes it's called fretting or elaborations. Or the illusion is that you're making progress just because you're worrying about it, just because you're thinking about it, just because you're, what's the other word, ruminating. What should I do? What should I do? Just the statement, I've got to figure this out. You know, you've just locked the door on your awareness. You just shut the door on it. You don't have to figure anything out. In fact, in fiction, if you try to figure something out, you're going to go in circles. The very nature of figuring is circular. Calculate nothing. The greatest discoveries, and I'm not particularly a historian, but some of the greatest discoveries just came kicking the door in. They weren't because somebody was ruminating. It was because somebody looked over and saw the door being kicked in. Here comes the discovery. Quite often, great scientists, great well-known people, even great performers or musicians or actors, you know, they don't just decide to be a great musician, like decide to become president. Well, there's a few people that have, I guess. So one of the ways you can work with this, and I'm happy to respond to questions about this, is besides the thought patterns that are rising and falling, going this way, going that way, and that because of the nature of thought, we're able to actually work with it in a way that we can actually work on the thought. You can think about thoughts. It appears that way, doesn't it? It looks like you can think about your thoughts. Look closely, see if that's happening. So a way that you can strengthen the awareness, you could say it this way, just a way of talking about it, probably nothing strengthened at all. But a way that you can work with that is more open, where there's less backfilling, where there's more openness, is a couple things. One is the way you'll know you're doing this is you'll feel a little bit more unsure about everything, a little bit more apprehensive about everything, a little bit more frightened about everything. It's not about getting rid of fear. The conventional way of getting rid of any kind of difficulty is to what? Cover it up. Nobody wants to spend the time or the energy or the intention to go into the source of something. To go into the source of something in this practice, this is either there is no source, but you have to see it. If you think there's a source, if you think there's something around the corner, you'll continue to spend lifetime after lifetime, day after day, month after month, year after year. There isn't anything else but this. You don't have to keep jumping to conclusions about otherness. There isn't. Everything is empty of other. There isn't any other. What you're seeing is just another aspect of your own dynamic, your own Buddha nature. This incredible situation, this incredible mandala that we arise in as consciousness. See that. And to go back to what I was originally starting out to say, the other five senses are ignored, and they they take away the awareness of those and suck up into the thinking process to protect the self-centeredness, the apparent me feeling that thinks that he, she, they can get somewhere or can protect something. So include sense of touch as you're ruminating. Include sense of seeing, colors, shapes, a very simple reception. Give everything your attention. Don't shut down the thought process and try to be a better person. In other words, like I talked about yesterday, don't improve. It's not that something won't improve through contrast, but if you work on improvement, you might as well be getting on a tilt-a-whirl or a merry-go-round. So you could actually do that. You could just, not with some kind of elaborate intention to, with some kind of intense motivation about it, but you could just include, just make friends with your sense fields. Just you're sitting, something comes up that's irregular or has a lot of sharp edges around the fringe. In other words, the memory of some difficult situation that's about to come up again. I'm just using that as an example. When that comes up, just relate to, you don't have to stay in your senses, but just flash on your senses, sense of touch, sense of color. If you flash on that, you'll immediately notice blue, and burgundy. You'll just notice it immediately. You don't even have to look at it. If you go to the receiving color, that's what you're going to get. And you're going to get the ochre color of the scroll and the all multicolored tanka and so on. And the same thing with if you flash on just how this feels, immediately you notice there's such a thing as gravity, which we take for granted all the time. We don't really realize that you can't walk across the room without this incredible force that, what's the source of that? Can you explain gravity? You use it every day for your particular agenda of living, going to the parking lot. Don't forget gravity. Remember that. Remember that. I think the Zen master lived into his hundreds. One book was published by him called Buddha is the Center of Gravity. I think it was published in 1974. Remember his name? Joshu Sasaki Roshi, yes, that's him. He was quite an interesting teacher. Also had very bad press. He apparently didn't understand boundaries very well. So in order to work with that kind of backfilling, and in order to see the way something arises, it could be positive, negative, or neutral, but we do some kind of backfilling, unless just in allowing something arises using the 5 dharmas of the Lanka. Something appears, and we instantly give it a name. We don't want to look at it for more than an eighth of a second without knowing what it is. Oh my gosh, what if we didn't know what it was? So we name it. Well, and we're in a society where everything, the medical, scientific, political, any of the other things, we immediately name because it gives us the feeling of, well, at least I know where I'm at and who I am. And you do, relatively. It's the way society works. It's the way cultures work. But if you're in this room, you at least have some kind of an interest in a transcendent spiritual path. Not the mundane path is going to show up there, of course. There needs to be some of that. Sometimes spiritual path, human beings get lost in that because they don't have the inspiration of someone who knows how to teach this. When I say that, it's not about identity. We need to use it somewhat. We need naming. We need an understanding of what we just named. But when it turns, you could say, when it turns dark, or when we don't want too much, we don't want to know too much about that. We tend to shut it down. And it may not, dark is just a metaphor for what we're doing. It's not actually dark. It might look like a spotlight. You might have the feeling that you're really looking closely at something. Sometimes I have talked about an alternating sense awareness practice, going from one sense to the other, back and forth. Yeah, and if you do that, you'd have to find your own rhythm. But if you do that, you'll notice not shutting out the thought patterns, but you notice that something happens, the thought pattern, because of the nature of consciousness, the hearing, receiving sounds, receiving colors, receiving smells, taste, touch, and so on. They don't exactly think, but they also are not separate from that. So if you do anything with the consciousness, just like the practice of one of the practices of meditation is having your eyes closed. As soon as you close your eyes, all the other senses get the cue, and they do the same thing. So it creates an artificial state of tranquility, peace, happiness. Great. Do that. Not wrong. It's just something you can do. But if you want to see what this is deeply, so when death comes without warning, you're ready. If you fear death, you're probably in a good room. This is a pretty good room to be in. Because I'm telling you, and don't believe a word I say, there isn't any death. That's an illusion. There isn't any death. How do I know? I don't know. If you don't understand that, drag it out of me. I mean it. There isn't. The very nature of an illusion is it just looks real. And the backfilling keeps, 15, 20, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60, 65, I'm talking about years, going by, and then death comes without warning, and then you go back in the shuttle, and you come back around, and maybe you show up in Andromeda, or maybe you show up on the dark side of the moon, where all those beings are gathered. You didn't know about those? Yeah. They're waiting to take over the earth or something. There's nothing to take over. Nothing is threatened. We actually are not threatened. I'm not saying there can't be some fear coming up, of course, but the fear is unreal, as the same as your separate identity is unreal. The reason it's so difficult is it seems so real. If we're not having the emotion, then what is the emotion? Where is it coming from? Backfilling. Don't look for sources. Look at whatever's in front of you, whatever's right in front of you. I don't care if it's a toothache, if it's a noisy neighbor, if it's whatever it is, whether it's up, down, back and forth. In other words, something very good and successful and happy, or something really terrible and ugly and offensive, or something neutral and beige. Beige supremacy, yes.
If we're fundamentally not threatened, what is it that can get ensnared in that apparent rebirth?
Because consciousness is so incredibly vast and powerful, then when it gets tricked by who knows what kind of causes and conditions, it gets tricked into buying into some kind of separation. It looks like this. That's how it looks. So you have to, in order to do this, to be very relevant, you have to look at that. You have to look at that fist that is your assumed self that you're protecting from everything. But it's the assumption that things are separate. Just a way of talking about it. There's probably ways talking about it that are maybe much more clear.
Is fear an aid to patience? Does it help us look at something instead of diving headlong into it?
Yeah. Just don't particularly get rid of the fear. Just use the fear. Anything that arises, once you become a student of the Dharma, of the Buddha Dharma, Buddha Dharma, awakened truth, once you become a student of that, it doesn't have to be Zen, it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be the Dalai Lama. Just once you become a student of that, then everything that arises is a teaching, and everything that arising is the face of the Buddha. The Buddha, when he awoke, and I was not there, but I was also not there. And same for you. We're all. This is, it's not separate. So everywhere he looked, he saw the Buddha, because if dependent origination is true, then he couldn't see anything else. There wasn't anything else. Everything was empty of elseness. More? Shut up.
You're talking about the alternating sense awareness practice.
Yes.
Can the 5 traditional senses be in the service of ego?
They can be hooked into it, but they need to have a boss, which is a thinking process. So the ego mind, a self-centered mind, in the Yogacara tradition, the 7th consciousness, or the Klesha mind, absconds with the objects and uses those objects. Vision. You look at someone's face. If you look at someone's face and they're frowning, if you can't just receive the frown, if you leave the frown for something about you, what have I done to offend them? If you leave the frown for something else, they have a tummy ache. If you abandon what's appearing for something else, go ahead.
Could you say what the difference between the 6th and the 7th consciousness is?
Try to. And it's my understanding of it. It's not Bill Waldron or Dan Lusthouse or Vasubandhu. They would all probably give you a different description. But my understanding of it is that the sixth consciousness is that aspect of the mind is quite impersonal. And it's just kind of keeping track of the centrality that we eventually sucks us up into an identity that needs protection. The basic centrality of it, that is very, it's not even objective. It's just not objective, not subjective. It doesn't have any, those don't work. So it's just that aspect of the mind that brings together this, what you're seeing and what you're smelling, what you're tasting, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, and what you're thinking. What's coming out of the Alaya Vijnana and down through the, when I say down, it's just a way of talking about it. It comes through the back door of the seventh consciousness, which is a way of keeping track of that and making all that operate so that what you smell isn't what somebody else is smelling. It's what you smell. Is that helpful? I bet it isn't. Go ahead.
I have some confusion around
Mm-hmm.
where the difference between something being received and something being produced.
Well said. What's the question?
Is there a difference between those two things?
Yes and no. There is, if there's a difference if you can see the difference, but the very seeing of the difference shows how they're not separate. That's why it's so difficult. That's why it's so challenging to the ego mind, a self-centered mind, to transcend this world, because we'll all settle for some kind of something that looks like transcendence, something that our friends will say, yeah, you transcended. Or, yeah, there's all kinds of versions of it. We'll settle. If you're not willing to lose, you're not going to awaken. You have to lose from the point of view. You have to lose. You know what I'm saying? You have to lose. It isn't actually a loss because there isn't anything to lose. You can't lose. You can't lose this. As is said in other traditions, there's really nothing. There's nothing threatened. There's nothing to be afraid of. But we don't get that by shutting down fear, going to war with fear, pushing on fear. So more about the sixth and seventh. Sokuzan.
When you awaken, does that centrality disappear?
Both. It comes and goes, but there's no success if it comes, and there's no defeat if it goes, and there's no success if it goes, and there's no defeat if it arises. Those polarities are pretty much, I don't know, how can I say it succinctly? Shot in the ass. How's that? Done for. It's done. The polarity is gone, and still you have pain, and still you have joy, and still everything is totally yours from now on. There isn't any now on. It's just a way of talking about it. You just are no longer confused about anything. Even confusion is not confusing, because you're no longer at war with anything. So if you're confused, you don't immediately think, my meditation is not working. You don't backfill anything that occurs. Don't backfill anything. A willingness to be without reference points, to be without knowledge, to be without understanding, and to be lost in the wilderness of your consciousness until it's no longer your consciousness. It's just perception only. Belongs to no one. This is sometimes pointed to and referred to as Buddha nature. Just really hard to explain that. I mean, to point to it directly. Although teachers try to do that, I try to do that. I haven't found anything. That's what I'm pointing at. Questions are helpful. Robert.
Is what you just said about perceptions, that they don't belong to anybody, is that true of thoughts as well?
Another way it's been said is there's no thinker. There's no actual identity. The thoughts are just coming and going. They're just all over the place. I mean, you think you're safe now because you're in a body, This is your preparation for death. I'm not being nihilistic. I'm just saying this isn't going to last very much longer. Relativity. Yeah, we'll settle on that. So it's not gonna. It's at some point that which has congealed into a self with a body and with a heartbeat and with a talent for playing the violin or any other thing you were kind of born with, or maybe a defect, what we would call a defect, or something wrong or out of balance, anything. From the point of view of subjectivity, you got it coming. From the point of objectivity, there isn't anyone. There's no objective person anywhere that is happening to. If you think that you are being put upon by your world, by your karma, by your neighbors, by the laws, by the world itself, this world is all about right and wrong, sacred and profane. I'm not saying it's not relatively true. Of course it's relatively true. And we should respect that. But at the same time, transcendence doesn't abandon that. It doesn't agree with that. It doesn't shut down it. It does nothing with it because it's not separate from it. But until you see it, then you, me, us will be stuck on right and wrong, up and down, back and forth, life and death. So when this consciousness, the body mind drops, goes back into the earth, into water, into fire, into air, into space, the consciousness, there's no way to know what's going to happen. It might go with it, good, or it might move off to the side. It might go and sit in a graveyard for 500 years, sit on a tombstone. Or appear to do that, and appear to someone who has the ability to actually receive that appearance. Because if it's there and there's nobody to receive the appearance, then it's like it goes back to, it kind of validates the tree falling in the woods with nobody to hear it. Nah, don't go there. That's kind of a dumb way of talking about anything. Go ahead.
Could you say how this body is preparation for death?
If you're looking at finding out who you are, if you're looking at finding out what this is, looking at all the sense fields, what's receiving, then when the body mind does drop, the identity is not with the body. You don't feel like you're the person who's going back. You're some kind of person who has a body mind complex. It's one thing, is going back into the dirt or into the fire. So you're preparing by seeing the difference between consciousness or perception, consciousness, and the body mind complex, the relative aspects of our situation in this particular very slow moving realm. If you're in a higher realm, to talk about it that way, it looks like there's a past and a future. And in a higher realm, there's no past, like in a dream. That's a good example. If you're in a dream, you notice that really isn't a past and a future there. And it looks like things are going ahead, but not really. Nothing ever gets anywhere. And nothing is solid. They're dream muffins that you're eating. And they have a really dream taste. And dream oxalates. Sorry, couldn't help that. I tried to stay away from that. So, try to see the way things are moving in your particular mind, and notice if you could just notice the subtlety of it rather than doing anything about it. If you're feeling negativity, rather than pushing on it or pulling on it, aggression and passion, or shutting down or distracting yourself, either artificially or chemically, turning away, go in, let it take you out. I'm not saying kill yourself. I'm saying go in and feel the texture of that junk. Feel the texture of it. Might not be very comfortable. Choo-choo.
Shane, who says he's from everywhere and nowhere, but I think might be in California at the moment, asks, karma seems to push or pull one in all directions from a relative experience. Where does the illusion of direction arise?
It's just something we invent. If there's any kind of movement, then we invent the direction. In a dream, you go back to that same image, there's a sense of movement, but there isn't any particular direction. I mean, sure, you could go back and say, well, I dreamt that I walked into an office building and there was, behind all the typewriters, there were baboons. monkeys, all trying to type. What was that thing they're supposed to type after 50 billion years? They would eventually type the Constitution of the United States. Wasn't it something like that?
Sonnet.
Huh?
A sonnet.
A sonnet. That's right. A little easier, or maybe not.
All the
Sonnet.
great books.
Huh?
All the great books.
Yes, all the great books. Donovan.
If, as you say, when there is movement, we invent the direction, do we not also invent the movement?
Don't get smart with me. We do. We invent everything. Everything is an invention. Any kind of movement. Fundamentally, as His Holiness the 16th Karmapa said on his deathbed in 1981, nothing happens. I mean, he was extremely generous to leave us with such a profound statement that his students could contemplate. If you think something occurs, if you think there's actually something happening, then you're tied into the karma of cause and effect. You're at the mercy of that. That being said, there's no way you can save beings unless you're in that karma. You can't do it from your high perch on the nothing happens platform. So you have to go into the world and function. This does not mean you have to join Buddhists Without Borders or something like that. It just means that you meet your karma right in front of you. It's in front of you all the time. And if you think it's a choice, you're blocking it out. It's not a choice. Everything you do is choiceless. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide. It's totally choiceless.
A question from Thomas from Germany. He asks, I heard you say that rather than following a thought or a sensation, we should try to see the space in which it occurred. What is this space? Thank you.
Fundamentally, it's not separate from what's occurring, but it needs to be seen that way. This is the practice part of it. Fundamentally, space, phenomena and space are not two different things. But we have to start somewhere. So we start with, because we have such a strong attachment and love and grasping and lust for something. We want that, but we don't want that. Wait, I think I might want that, but not that. So it's looking at that without pushing, pulling, about no math at all. Just watch the phenomena. Impermanence, impermanence, impermanence. Nothing lasts. All compounded things will vanish, as it said by the Buddha. But in order to see that, you have to look at what it is. And when you look at what it is, it holds still a little bit, and then you see it start to come apart because it's compounded. And when it comes apart, that's when you start to understand more deeply what the nature of space is. You're actually looking at space as it manifests as form. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Same is true of feeling, perception, concept, consciousness, traditional teaching, going back to the Prajnaparamita literature.
When I can see that my mind is pretty rapidly cycling through passion, aggression, and ignorance, and I'm endeavoring to just watch that, it still feels like it's being fueled. Where is that fuel coming from?
Doesn't matter where it's coming from. Don't worry about sources. Worry about what's showing up. I'm not saying that the awareness that's looking at what's showing up might not spontaneously take you into a source. So, or something that appears to be a source. It might be just a charade. The ego mind is so incredibly good at keeping any insight, prajna, from seeing that it is unreal. It will protect itself, and it has so many ways of doing that. And one of the main ones is fear. It throws up fear. And if you're always, when fear comes up, if you do anything with it other than just receive it, then you're going to continue to spin. Not condemning anybody to anything, but I'm sitting on the tan and you're listening to me. So I have to tell you that. So you're doing it correctly. You're just, if I were to use another image, I'm talking to somebody, you're on the side of a mountain, you're going to use a common metaphor, you're climbing a mountain towards awakening. And you're just at a particular place on the path where that's how it looks. I would say, yes, that's exactly how it's done. Just keep doing it. Keep looking at the path, keep looking at the sinkholes, keep getting hit in the face by branches, keep having your eyes pecked out by crows, Oh, sorry. That's what happened to me. There's only one crow. They pecked out my third eye. Yes.
Can we actually just witness that cycle if there's a subtle desire for that to not
That's
go away?
that's why it's so hard, is because you think the desire has to go away. And it's not accusing you of anything, because we think that things need to be different, but no, everything, it's one package, so to speak. So just whatever's happening, just the desire to want it to go away is part of what you observe that too. Just receive that. Less production, more reception. The feeling that ego or self-centered mind of the seventh consciousness will start to have is, this is not good. This is not good. We're getting too close to the closet where I'm storing all of my Halloween costumes. Getting too close to my hideout. Ego does not want to be disturbed. It wants to continue to go on and be somebody. More.
So back to the 5 dharmas, the first 3, you were saying something arises and then we name it, and then it seems like it's almost simultaneous. And then is the projection onto that a habitual pattern?
You mean after the naming?
Yes.
Quite often it's habitual patterns, yes. It's just the whole knee-jerk, reaction to it. We're so, and that's why the sitting practice of meditation, if it's done enough, have to do a lot of it. It can't be, when I say it can't be, I don't know, maybe it can be. Maybe you can see this without any meditation. I don't think so, but I don't know. A lot of things happen on the dark side of the moon. So just watching that happen, less meddling, which means the subtle kind of meddling is the backfilling part, where something happens, and instead of just looking at it and having an attitude of, I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't even say I don't know, but just not knowing, not just because you can jump away from it into some kind of thought pattern because you're so damn smart. Don't do it. Give it a chance to just be what it is in that open dimension where even the name it's like having Post-it notes where all the stick-em fell off. You still have the Post-it note, but it won't stick to it because your awareness about or with, not even about, but your awareness is looking at that so closely that, and it might even be threatening. It might be the ego mind wants to have protection, well, at least I know what's happening. No, you don't. You know what you think is happening. It's just like when we look at someone's face, instead of receiving, if you look at someone's face and you receive what is there, you won't know who they are. Even if it's your mother, even if it's your son, your teacher, your next door neighbor. If you think you know what you're looking at, delusion. Because if you see what you're looking at, you say you're not separate from anything. You see your own face before your parents' birth in everything, everywhere, just to use the traditional image. You always see yourself. How do I know? How do I know? I don't know. I don't have knowledge about it. Nor do I claim to have wisdom about it. I don't really make any claims. Except, well, that one claim, I kind of make that. I get to be the abbot for a while. Who made me the abbot? I made me the abbot. And I may make you an abbot. Or not. May make somebody an abbot that I've never met yet. I may die tomorrow, and then Just have to figure it out yourself. Don't get your hopes up. We'll get to take over. Finally, we'll be able to return to noble silence, functional speech, get this place underway and stop all the whatever that was happening. Further questions? We have a few minutes left. I really like questions, so you can't, you can ask me questions I might not be able to answer, but I really like them. Helps me know what's going on. Yes, Kyun.
What are we filling with the backfill?
There's thoughts and ideas. We're just putting stuff in the way so we don't feel quite so threatened by the fundamental truth that we may not exist. There may be no being that exists. Until you see that when you see that that's true, then it's nothing is threatened. Then there's nothing to. Then it's a relief. In the tradition, it's sometimes called freedom because you're free from all that. You don't have to worry about anything anymore at all. This doesn't mean you're not concerned with having a migraine. Excuse me, but the fear, if there's any trepidation about anything, it's just a relative situation. I don't want to. Get hit by a car, or don't want to do anything that's particular. So there's still that, just a relative situation, but it's not blown out of sight with some kind of paranoia about whatever it may be, depression or fear. More?
Is it the same as not producing or something like that?
Yeah, it's receiving. You don't have to stop producing so much as if you begin to receive, then less energy from the awareness, which is awareness is about receiving, thinking is about producing. And they're not separate from each other. They're two aspects of the same thing, just like life and death, like any polarity. Can't have one without the other. I think. I don't know. What do you think, Danny? Yoshida, do you have any questions?
How does insight equate with thoughts?
Yeah, thoughts are filling. It's not that thoughts can't help us figure out how to build a tool barn or how to, or in a fancy, more elevated way, figure out the way thoughts are working, the way psychology works. Even Buddhist psychology is full of all kinds of thoughts and ideas and concepts about the very nature of mind and all of that. But insight, and I don't often use that word, but if I was going to use that wisdom mind or prajna, to use the Sanskrit, it's just about receiving the truth. And so, thinking or thoughts are about producing things, producing thoughts and thoughts and thoughts. Thinking about this, thinking about that. Saying, I got to think about that. Well, let me figure this out. And then we actually get swamped sometimes by our thoughts. Are just so. You can't stop thoughts because the reason you can't, they don't belong to you. If they were your property, you could just, it probably wouldn't make that sound. It'd probably be like that. But you can't, if you try to stop your thoughts, I'm sure you've noticed that. That's quite often what brings people to meditation is they get so haunted by their own crazy elaborations on everything, this and that and this and that. It's just, so we bring ourselves down, sit down, hold still, and what do? We look at the thinker or look at the thoughts, watch the thoughts. I'm not trying to get anybody to get better. Don't improve. I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is if I can help you see your Buddha nature, see your true nature, that's what I would like to help you with. And you can practice this without even being a Buddhist. But you'd still be practicing awakened truth, which is a big lie. Would have to be, or it couldn't be true. Don't scratch your head. I might think you're asking a question. Choo-choo.
C from Madison has a question. In an analytical world, what is the best way to prevent analyzing everything?
Just watch the analysis and don't add to it. I shouldn't be analyzing, or it's okay to analyze here, or just watch the analysis. Just observe it, whether it's happening outside or it's happening, and you don't interfere. Don't meddle with your mind. Quite often, meddling is about trying to change something so you're a little better off. So you're like used to be an analyzer, but done with that now. Never analyze anything. More? That the entire question? Yeah. Meditate a lot, sit a lot, block sit. Do 4-hour periods of where you're not doing anything but watching your analysis. 4 hours of watching your analysis is pretty damn boring. And so you discover, you may not, maybe something else, you may discover you're actually entertained by the analysis. So you're weaning yourself away from the entertainment that is showing up as analysis. People promote their self-centeredness by analyzing and by thinking and overthinking and underthinking. It protects the self-centeredness. To see who this is can be extremely painful. I'm warning you. So if you don't want this, go do something else. But if you want this, then come this way and I'll poke your eyes out. Yes. You have a question?
I don't, but Mayun does,
Mayun.
from France. She says and asks.
Mafia Concierge. I didn't think that would come up. But see, I can speak French once in a while.
You use the word transcendence. What is your definition of it? Thank you.
It's a relative word that to actually it's a going beyond word to transcend the relative grip of belief and opinion and idea and incredible weight and just the gravitas of being a living being. Eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, mind, receiving. All of this is coming and saying, you're here, you're receiving, you're real, you're somebody. And so to transcend that is to actually see beyond it without leaving it. The body doesn't vanish. It becomes more real, more intense, because then you're no longer relating to your sense fields, your idea about the sense fields. Then you actually smell, you actually taste, you actually suffer. You actually have feelings that don't have any interlocutor in between them. So you actually realize that the consciousness has been downloaded into a very low vibration world that seems, that's totally, I think even science will look at that and say, it's mostly space. Well, why does the space stop me? Why can't I put my hand through it? Well, go to sleep, have a dream, and you'll be able to put your hand right through that. So transcending is to see that the limitations that you put upon yourself by using these solid kind of things, or light, dark, taste, smell, even thought patterns, are building up some kind of a me feeling or an identity. Transcendence, it's very simple. You just see beyond that. And it's not actually about beyond. Because if it were a beyond, then we're right back to another kind of relativity. Actually, it's this that's empty of an other. So it's quite astonishing. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just transcendent. Good question. She already knows this. She's asking me that question so that I can help you guys. Further questions? I think it's a good time to close. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our chant books. I'd like to remind everybody about the donation boxes that are in the hallway. Also, we receive donations online through PayPal, checks in the mail, cash. We rely on and deeply appreciate your financial assistance. Thank you.
May the merit of this
penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jio san chi shifu, shi son bu sa moko sa, moko hoja horomi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.
O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.